news updates online at 560theanswer.com. Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. But in for Amy this morning is Charles Thomas, former ABC7 political reporter.
Yep. Yep, that's me.
Charles, you're familiar with Francis Parker and Latin. These highly, prized in certain circles, certain WASPy circles. Private schools.
Very pricey.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Private schools.
And these, we spend a lot of time talking about the maleducation and indoctrination in big school systems like CPS, but the real incubators of hateful ideologies, not to mention bad economics, are these upper echelon private schools like Francis Parker and Latin. This is where the Vanguard class sends their kids to lord over the unwashed masses upon the completion of their matriculation.
The elites, as they call them.
So I was interested in this story by J.D. Busch that he recounted over at Chicago Contrarian about the Shipley School in Philadelphia, where he graduated, which is an analog to, say, a Francis Parker in Chicago. What does it say, what the story he shared about the Shipley School that has application beyond these elite private schools? In fact, it has application in every school. And it's another sort of story about, I heard about that story and the way people react to these things on the other events as the culture has become increasingly intolerant of dissent, disagreement, failure to comply philosophically. These are stories that just, I read about it. They happened to somebody else. They happened at somebody else's school, never mine. And so people are always surprised when it visits them. I'm talking about these, vile, brainless sort of orcs, to borrow from Lord of the Rings, that ascend from Middle Earth to ravage anything that has been targeted for elimination. J.D. Busch is a technology researcher, entrepreneur, and investor, and a graduate of the Shipley class of 1993. J.D. Busch, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. I didn't bring any caviar to the show, but I'll bring the virtual glass of champagne.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, exactly. I'm sure a graduate of Shipley, you must be living the life of champagne wishes and caviar dreams, to borrow from Robin Leach, of course. So, JD, tell us about Shipley and the story of Shipley's descent into DEI madness and its application to those not fortunate enough to attend a Shipley or a Francis Parker.
Of course. And I think what I would say about Shipley, as you point out, is completely analogous to schools in Chicago like Latin and Parker. And in fact, in many cases, these schools are getting orders from the same accreditation organization, which is working with all of them, which is the National Association of Independent Schools. So what happened at Shipley, again, this could have happened at any private school. Heck, it could have even happened at some of the more progressive Catholic schools, and it's happening in CPS as well. And essentially, over the past 5 years, a DEI-based curriculum, much as you might have seen in companies as well, has become the focal point of what these organizations are teaching students and what faculty are told to believe. And the Achilles heel of DEI really calling attention to what happened. And I know you guys all the time talk about the oppressed-oppressor binary and all that stuff. I call it the spinning intersectional pinwheel of death. But the Achilles heel ended up being the Jewish student. And I knew what this was like to be like because I am one. And Essentially, under DEI, Jews were lumped into the white category. And at Shipley, there was a lot of programming. They hired multiple DEI individuals full-time because, of course, these schools have money, as you point out. And there was a rise in anti-Semitism following October 7th. One of the DEI heads, who was subsequently fired, had posted some very lovely tweets on X, calling for the destruction of the Jewish state. The head of the school, who was fully trained by the party, if you will, acknowledged this, and when this DEI head was fired, blamed it on a Jewish mob of parents who pushed back. So there was no accountability. And essentially what happened in Shipley is very similar to what's happening at other schools right now. You have many parent revolts, and at this point in time, more parents are willing to speak up. I was one of the first. I was not a parent at the school, so I covered the firing of the original DEI head, actually on LinkedIn, the Interport Contrarian. And essentially, again, I think the key lessons learned is this is happening everywhere. The Jewish student problem, if you will, in these schools really has blown open the egregious position of DEI. It's not debatable that, under DEI, there are good people and bad people. As I like to quote Animal Farm or channel it, black, brown, good, Jew, white, bad. And there's a chance to take back the schools now, finally.
Well, I mean, but in terms of the chance to take back the school, I mean, like we've seen with the university presidents in the Ivy League that have been deposed, I mean, there's not a take back of the school that's happening, even with donors saying, I'm not going to donate anymore, and so on and so forth, making a big show of it, who have donated hundreds of millions. It doesn't seem like the school is being taken back or the culture is really changing that much. In fact, look at what happened at Cornell on the first day of classes. They've vandalized the administration building, so that the university president resigned from Cornell. That impacted exactly nothing in particular. It seems like this is so much more deeply rooted than taking out a university president or even a series of administrators or a professor here or an RA there. It's just part of the campus culture, and that redounds to these private schools at the K through 12 level as well. So how, I mean, what is the prospect of really taking back the school? Why don't they'll just get a new functionary that is more savvy than the guy fired for tweeting intemperate things?
That's a great question. Ultimately, and I spend most of my life in business and not writing about these things, but the beauty of private schools is that they are, in fact, corporations. Obviously, they are nonprofits. But you can look at their financials, you can look at their balance sheets, and you can look at enrollment numbers. And what's happening is very much like the election. People are voting with their feet. So when at Shipley, the number of students drops from 846 to 715, and the balance sheet drops in just a couple of years from 113 million to 101 million, people are leaving. And ultimately, I think what is beginning to happen is that parents are realizing that they can take action. It's also possible to sue the boards of these schools, and we've already seen some of that activity in different schools. But there is something in the nonprofit world which is really critical, which is called the duty of obedience. So if you're on a board in a traditional company, you've got a fiduciary duty, and you also obviously need to look at mission as well. But in the nonprofit world, if a nonprofit deviates from its stated mission, that is grounds potentially for a lawsuit. And board members can't be held liable. So the quote I heard in National Review in a piece they published on the same topic in the past week is that if 20% of parents speak up, that's all it takes. That's all it takes. And if 2% are litigious and they file a lawsuit, it is possible to take these private schools back. I agree with you, though. It's a much greater uphill battle in a place like CPS. It's a much greater uphill battle at a place like Cornell or Penn, where I went. But again, more people are speaking up. I think the smaller battles will need to be fought now. This is the early stage of the war, right? These are the skirmishes. We can win these skirmishes at these smaller institutions. ultimately, I don't know what's going to happen to these elite universities. I think there's a reckoning. And what I can tell you in business is that firms like mine and others are now looking to hire from the Big Ten, where historically we recruited at the University of Chicago and Northwestern and places like that. We are looking to expand, our focal point as to where we can recruit. We're also looking for students who didn't go to college, because that check the box no longer matters. We're looking at skills. So I think at the macro basis, at higher education, it's going to be a multi-year battle, but we can win these skirmishes, and that's what I want to encourage people listening to on the here. At Shipley, parents are winning. They fired the headmaster. There's a new headmaster in place. And I realize this is just an elite microcosm, but it's a proof point we can win.
One other point you raise in your piece is about the accreditation issue, and in the case of Shipley, the National Association of Independent Schools. But these accredited agencies are also captured by the left primarily, and so is this the NAIS? Should people understand these agencies that provide accreditation to schools that then they market and charge corresponding tuition and so forth? These accreditation agencies, are they an additional hurdle in the fight you're describing, or can they be used as an ally?
At this point, they need to be circumvented. No good is coming out of the National Association of Independent Schools, NACE, guidance on DEI. NACE is doing good work elsewhere, but you're right to say they've been captured. However, I like to think that it only takes 10%, 20% bad actors to capture an institution, and it only takes 10 or 20% to bring them back. I think the question is whether they're salvageable or new institutions will crop up for accreditation. I've spoken to a number of other alums and parents of these schools who are interested in creating new accreditation bodies, for example. So I think you're going to see some of that. I also think the market is speaking, the free market. So what you're seeing in different areas of charter schools focused on classical academies. So literally teaching students Latin, Greek, and the classics. These are public schools, where it's an alternative to the world of CPS around the country. So I think there's multiple paths out. But again, what I would encourage those affiliated, those donating money, is that these institutions can be reformed if enough vocal people like me speak up. But if they're not reformed, we are going to create new institutions alongside for accreditation. Now, what I will say as well is there are schools which are members of NACE which don't follow this garbage. There are schools in Florida. There's a school in Indiana called La Lumiere, and they embrace diversity, but they do not embrace this radical notion of equity and DEI, where all of a sudden there are the oppressed and the oppressors, and everyone else is evil. So, you can still take the good and leave the bad, but ultimately, I think a lot of folks in the nonprofit world, and I'll just say this, are lazy, and they take all of it. But again, it only takes 10% or 20% of parents and those who give money to speak up and carry a stick, and we can win.
Can I ask a question? Can diversity be achieved organically? Do you feel it can be done organically in 2024?
Phenomenal question. Absolutely. And I can point to a lot of schools in Indiana, right across the border. There's a school called Forest Ridge Academy. It's a K through 8 school. It's incredibly diverse. I think white kids are 30% or 35%, and there's no DEI in this school. Everybody is treated equally. Arabs and Jews get along. Blacks and whites get along. There is none of this. So, and actually, I think if you begin to talk to minorities, this is what they want. They don't want DEI. People want to be treated as individuals. The moment you subject people to affinity groups, and all of a sudden all that matters is the group identity, the ego diminishes immensely. So I think the natural evolution is simple diversity. And I think if you talk to parents and those involved, that's what they want. There's nothing wrong with diversity. In fact, diversity is great. But it's when you have this false notion of equity placed inside that construct, which, by the way, is illegal, as we all know, and Robbie Starbuck is doing God's work in the corporate sector these days, exposing it. We again, we can win and we can achieve a role which is diverse in these schools, but we can dump the equity.
J.D. Busch, technology researcher, entrepreneur, and investor, also Shipley, Philadelphia, class of 1993. Check out his piece at chicagocontrarian.com. The prep school Bolshevik revolution runs out of gas. J.D. Busch, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And he joined us on the turnkey.pro answer line.
Connect with Dan and Amy using the AM560 mobile app. Download it today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
Join Allie Beth Stuckey and the Illinois Family Institute for the Faith, Family, and Freedom Banquet, 7 p.m. Friday, September 6th at the Tinley Park Convention Center. For tickets, go to IllinoisFamily.org.
Christianity brings civilization, goodness.
Allie Beth Stuckey, wife, mom, author, followed by thousands on her hit